"Mom, it's gone." That was what my son Michael said when I finally asked about the $144,000 I had trusted him to keep safe for me. And then he laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just a short breath of amusement, as if I had asked whether it might rain tomorrow. I remember the way the afternoon light filtered through the kitchen blinds, striping the hardwood floor in pale gold lines, the way the coffee in my mug had already gone cold because I had been rehearsing that question in my mind for 3 days. I am 68 years old. I have balanced checkbooks, paid mortgages, buried a husband, and raised a son. I am not a foolish woman. But in that moment, sitting across from my only child at the same oak table where I once cut his pancakes into perfect squares, I felt something inside me shift, not break, not shatter, just shift quietly into place. 72 hours earlier, I had been organizing my retirement paperwork. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. I had made a neat stack of documents: my pension statements, Social Security estimates, the deed from the house I sold after my husband passed. That house had been ours for 34 years. When I sold it, the proceeds, $144,000 after taxes and fees, felt like a final gift from the life we built together. Michael had insisted I let him help. "Mom, you don't need to worry about investments at your age," he'd said gently, squeezing my shoulder. "I'll put it somewhere safe. Better returns. Less stress for you." I remember how relieved I felt. How proud. My son, successful, confident, speaking about high-yield accounts and market timing as if he had the whole world mapped out. I signed the transfer papers at the bank, trusting him the way I trusted gravity. The money moved into a joint account he said would make things easier. For a while, I didn't question it. Sunday dinners continued as always. His wife, Lauren, would set out her white ceramic plates, the ones with the thin blue rim, and call me Mom, in that bright, careful voice of hers. Their 2 children would run down the hallway, socks sliding on hardwood, laughter filling every corner. I told myself I was blessed. I told my friends. At church that retirement felt peaceful. But small things began to change. The monthly statements stopped arriving at my house. When I asked, Michael said everything was paperless now. When I asked for the account balance one afternoon, he checked his phone and answered too quickly, as if he had rehearsed the number. Lauren would change the subject, asking about my garden or whether I needed help with the gutters. I noticed. I simply chose not to press. Until 3 days ago, when I tried to log into the account from my laptop and found that my password no longer worked. I called Michael that evening. He sounded distracted. "I'll handle it, Mom," he said. "Don't stress." That word lingered with me. Stress. As if the money I earned by standing beside my husband for 4 decades was some trivial allowance. As if I were a child worrying over pocket change. So I drove over this afternoon without calling first. Lauren opened the door, surprised but smiling. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and something baking in the oven. Michael came in from the den, phone still in his hand. I asked simply, "Can we look at the account together?" That was when he said it. "Mom, it's gone." Then he laughed. I studied his face carefully. There was no panic there. No apology. Just a strange confidence. Like someone who believes the outcome has already been decided. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "We used it. For the house. You weren't using it anyway." The words hung in the air between us. Light as dust, heavy as stone. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded once, as if I were processing a minor clerical error. But inside, something settled into clarity. The laughter. The missing statements. The locked account. They were not accidents. And for the first time since my husband's funeral, I realized I was sitting at a table where I no longer understood the rules of the game. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though the distance between Michael's house and my condominium is barely 8 miles. The late afternoon sun was low, casting long shadows across the highway, and I kept both hands steady on the steering wheel, as if gripping something solid might keep my thoughts from drifting. I replayed his words in my mind, not the explanation, not the justification, but the tone. Casual, certain, as though my consent had never been part of the equation. When I pulled into my assigned parking space, I sat in the car for a full minute before turning off the engine. The dashboard clock read 4:32. For a brief, strange moment, I wondered what I would have been doing at 4:32 10 years ago. Probably preparing dinner. Probably waiting for my husband to come home from work, his footsteps heavy but familiar in the hallway. I carried my purse upstairs and placed it on the small entry table by the door. The condominium was quiet in a way that felt different now. Not lonely, just observant. The walls seemed to hold their breath. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected shaking, perhaps tears. Instead, I felt an odd clarity, like cold air filling my lungs. I sat at the small round table by the window and opened my laptop. The login page still rejected my password. I tried again, slower this time, pressing each key deliberately. Access denied. I closed the computer gently, as if it were fragile. I thought about the day I signed the joint account forms. The bank had smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and fresh coffee. Michael had sat beside me, explaining how this would make it easier for him to manage transfers and watch the market. I remember how the banker had asked, "Are you comfortable with this arrangement?" I had smiled and said yes without hesitation. Comfortable. That word now echoed with a different weight. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet where I keep a small metal file box. Inside are documents I have carried through every major chapter of my life. Birth certificates, marriage license, mortgage statements, the original deed to the house we sold. I lifted out the folder labeled financial transfers and placed it on the kitchen table. The paper felt crisp beneath my fingers. I found a copy of the transfer authorization. My name appeared first on the joint account designation. Primary holder. I read that line 3 times. Primary holder. I had not given the money as a gift. I had not signed it away. I had entrusted it. There is a difference. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Memories surfaced, not of money, but of Michael as a boy. The way he would bring me his piggy bank when he wanted help counting his allowance. He trusted me then. He believed I would protect what was his. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, the direction of that trust had reversed, and I had assumed it was permanent. I opened my eyes and reached for my phone. I did not call him. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I had not dialed in over a year. Daniel Reeves, my husband's attorney. He had handled our estate planning and the sale of our home. Practical, direct, discreet. My thumb hovered over the call button. I hesitated, not because I doubted what needed to be done, but because pressing that button would mean acknowledging something I had avoided all afternoon. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a decision made without me. I set the phone down and took a slow breath. Outside the window, a neighbor was walking her dog along the sidewalk, the leash slack, the evening ordinary. Life had not shifted for the rest of the world. Only for me. I picked up the phone again and scheduled a meeting through Daniel's office website for the following morning at 10 o'clock. The confirmation email arrived within seconds. I folded the transfer documents back into their folder, but I did not return them to the closet. I left them on the table where I could see them. Then I made myself a simple dinner, grilled chicken and steamed green beans, measuring each portion carefully the way I always have. I ate slowly, methodically. If my son believed I would respond with panic or pleading, he did not know me as well as he thought. I washed my plate, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. When I turned off the kitchen light, the room fell into shadow, but my mind did not. For the first time since he laughed, I felt something solid beneath the confusion. Not anger, not revenge, just resolve. Daniel Reeves's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, the kind with narrow windows and polished brass numbers. Beside the elevator, I arrived 10 minutes early, as I always do, and sat in the reception area with my purse resting neatly on my lap. The carpet was a muted gray. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. I watched a young assistant move quietly between desks, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. Everything in that office felt orderly, measured, predictable. When Daniel stepped out to greet me, his hair looked more silver than I remembered, but his handshake was steady. He led me into his office and closed the door with a gentle click. I placed the folder on his desk without ceremony. "I need you to look at this," I said. My voice did not tremble. He adjusted his glasses and began reading through the documents, turning each page slowly. I studied his expression the way I had studied my son's the day before. No laughter here, no casual dismissal, only concentration. When he reached the joint account agreement, he paused. "You are listed as primary account holder," he said carefully. "Was there ever a written agreement transferring ownership of the funds to your son?" I shook my head. No, he was supposed to manage it. That was all. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Management does not equal ownership, he replied. The sentence settled into the room like a quiet anchor. He explained that while the account was joint, as primary holder, I retained significant authority. Transfers made without my explicit consent could be examined, potentially reversed, depending on documentation and timing. I listened without interrupting. Numbers were discussed. Dates. Transaction records that would need to be requested from the bank. I did not feel vindicated. I felt informed. There is a difference. When the meeting ended, Daniel promised to initiate a formal inquiry that afternoon. I thanked him and stepped back into the sunlight outside. The city moved as usual around me. Cars idled at traffic lights. A man in a navy suit hurried across the street with a phone pressed to his ear. I walked to my car slowly, aware that something fundamental had shifted. The situation was no longer a private family misunderstanding. It was now documented, structured, official. That realization brought an unexpected calm. I did not call Michael on the drive home. Instead, I stopped at the bank branch where the original transfer had been processed. The lobby was bright, with wide windows and a long counter of light wood. I asked to speak with the branch manager and presented my identification. I requested a complete printout of all transactions from the joint account since its opening. The manager typed quietly, printed pages, and handed them across the desk. I thanked her and placed them neatly into my folder. I did not read them there. I waited until I was home, seated once again at my kitchen table beneath the steady ticking clock. Page after page revealed transfers I had never approved. Large sums moved in structured increments. $40,000 here, $20,000 there. A final transfer labeled down payment disbursement. The date aligned exactly with the purchase of Michael and Lauren's new home 3 months ago. I remembered the housewarming party, the spacious kitchen island, the granite countertops. Lauren had given me a tour with a bright smile, explaining how fortunate they were to secure the property in such a competitive market. I had admired the wide staircase and said how proud I was of them. Now I looked at the transaction date again. My money had not been idle. It had built their equity. I folded the statement carefully and placed it back into the folder. My reflection in the darkened window looked composed. Older, yes, but not defeated. I reached for my phone and silenced it before it could ring. I knew there would be a call soon. Perhaps confusion. Perhaps irritation. Perhaps another laugh. This time, I would not ask for explanations. I would ask for accountability. The call came the next morning at 9:14, just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, did you go to the bank? Michael's voice carried a strain that had not been there before. Not laughter. Not confidence. Something tighter. I looked out the window at the parking lot below, at a delivery truck backing slowly into a space, at the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday morning. Yes, I said evenly. I did. There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretches just long enough to reveal discomfort. You did not have to do that, he replied. We already talked about it. I rested my elbow on the table and traced the rim of my mug with my fingertip. We did not talk. I said. You informed me. Silence again. Then a shift in tone. Defensive now. Mom, that money was just sitting there. Lauren and I needed it for the down payment. It is still in the family. You are going to live with us someday anyway. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not theft in his mind. Redistribution. A future he had planned without consulting me. You decided that for me? I asked. He exhaled sharply. I am trying to protect you. You are not getting any younger. The sentence landed heavier than he intended. I did not respond immediately. I let the quiet stretch between us. In that quiet, I heard more than his words. I heard assumption, entitlement, a quiet belief that my resources were extensions of his ambition. I met with Daniel Reeves yesterday, I said calmly. The reaction was immediate. Why would you bring a lawyer into this? His voice rose and steadied. This is family. I looked down at the printed statements spread neatly across my table. The inked numbers felt impersonal, precise. Family does not remove the need for clarity. I replied. I did not authorize those transfers. He began explaining quickly, layering justifications over each other. The housing market was competitive. Interest rates were favorable. They intended to refinance and make it right. I listened without interrupting. Each explanation sounded less like a misunderstanding and more like a strategy. Michael, I said softly, you never asked. The line went quiet again. In that pause, I imagined him standing in his spacious kitchen, perhaps glancing toward Lauren, perhaps covering the phone with his hand. I could almost see the granite countertops that my money had helped secure. "We thought you would say no," he admitted at last. The honesty startled me more than the laughter had. There it was. The decision had not been impulsive. It had been calculated. "So you removed the possibility," I said. My voice remained steady. I surprised myself with that steadiness. "Mom, do not make this bigger than it is," he pleaded. "We can work something out." I folded the bank statements into a clean stack. "It is already bigger than you think," I answered. "The inquiry has begun." He inhaled sharply. I did not elaborate. I did not threaten. I simply stated a fact. The conversation ended without resolution. When I set the phone down, my hands were still steady. Outside, a breeze moved through the small trees lining the sidewalk, their leaves shifting in quiet patterns. I stood and carried the documents back to the file box, but I did not lock them away. I placed them carefully inside and closed the lid. Then I walked into the bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. Inside lay a small velvet box containing my husband's wedding band. I picked it up and held it in my palm. He had trusted me with every financial decision we ever made. We discussed. We agreed. We signed together. I placed the ring back in its box and closed the drawer gently. This was no longer about the money alone. It was about the quiet rewriting of my future without my consent. And I had no intention of allowing that to stand. Daniel called me 2 days later, just after noon, while I was folding a load of laundry in the small room off my hallway. The steady hum of the dryer filled the space, warm air brushing against my hands as I lifted a towel and smoothed it flat. His voice was calm, professional, but there was an undercurrent of urgency beneath it. He had received the full transaction records from the bank's internal review department. The transfers had been initiated online, authenticated through Michael's device, but authorized under the joint account structure that required only one holder's confirmation. There had been no written documentation stating that the funds were a gift. No memorandum. No promissory note. No agreement transferring ownership. Legally, the money remained mine. I thanked him for the clarity and asked what the next step would be. He explained that a formal demand letter could be issued requesting immediate restitution of the transferred amount. If compliance was not voluntary, further action could be taken. His tone remained neutral, but the implication was clear. This was no longer a matter of family persuasion. It was documentation against assumption. After I hung up, I stood quietly in the laundry room for a long moment, holding a folded towel against my chest. I had imagined many difficult conversations in my life. I had never imagined one that required my son to receive a legal letter bearing my name. I carried the laundry basket into the bedroom and placed the neatly folded clothes into their drawers. Each movement felt deliberate, measured. That evening, Michael arrived at my condominium without calling first. I saw his car pull into the parking lot from my kitchen window. He walked toward the entrance with quick strides, shoulders tense, jaw set. When I opened the door, he did not step inside immediately. He looked at me as if trying to measure how much I already knew. "Did you really have Daniel send that letter?" he asked. I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. "Yes," I replied. He moved into the living room, pacing once across the carpet before turning to face me. "Mom, this is embarrassing," he said. "Lauren is furious. She says you are making us look irresponsible." I sat down in my usual armchair and folded my hands in my lap. "Were you responsible?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. The question seemed to land heavier than any accusation. "We were going to pay it back," he insisted. "Over time." I studied his face, searching for the boy who once asked me for help counting coins on the kitchen table. I saw only a man uncomfortable with consequences. "You should have asked," I said. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration rising. "You would have said no." I nodded once. "Then you would have had your answer." The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. He looked around my condominium as if seeing it for the first time, its modest furniture, its narrow hallway, the framed photographs on the bookshelf. "You are going to ruin this over money," he said finally. I felt a small shift inside me at that sentence. Not anger. Recognition. "No," I replied. "You already decided what to risk. I am simply deciding what to protect." His shoulders lowered slightly, the fight draining into something closer to uncertainty. For the first time, he did not argue. He did not laugh. He simply stood there, absorbing the reality that I was not retreating. When he left, the door closed softly behind him. I did not follow. I did not call out. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, listening to the quiet settle back into place. The demand letter would be delivered formally the next morning. The path forward was no longer emotional. It was procedural, and for the first time since that afternoon at his kitchen table, I felt fully awake. The demand letter was delivered by certified mail at 9:20 the next morning. Daniel sent me a copy by electronic mail as well, a clean document on firm letterhead outlining the total amount transferred, the dates of each transaction, and a formal request for full repayment within 14 business days. There were no emotional phrases, no accusations, just facts arranged in careful order. I read it twice before closing my laptop. The condominium felt especially quiet that day. I vacuumed the living room, wiped down the kitchen counters, and watered the small fern near the window. Ordinary tasks, steady movements. I refused to let anxiety rush ahead of events that had not yet occurred. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone began to vibrate across the kitchen table. Lauren's name appeared on the screen. I watched it for a moment before answering. Her voice was controlled, but tight. "I cannot believe you would involve lawyers," she said. "We thought you trusted us." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling, at the faint hairline crack that runs across the paint near the light fixture. "Trust does not replace consent," I replied. There was a short, incredulous laugh on her end of the line. "It was for the house. For your grandchildren. You benefit too." I closed my eyes briefly. Benefit? As if financial security in my later years were a luxury rather than a necessity. "I was not consulted," I said evenly. "And the funds were not a gift." Her tone sharpened. "Michael is under so much pressure already. This could affect his credit, his career, our reputation." I let her words settle. Reputation. I thought about the housewarming party, about neighbors admiring their new property, about the pride in Michael's voice as he described square footage and resale value. "Your reputation would not be at risk if the money had not been taken," I answered quietly. There was silence on the line, heavy and offended. "You are being dramatic," she said finally. I felt something inside me grow very still at that word. Dramatic. For requesting the return of what was mine. "No," I replied. "I am being precise." She ended the call shortly after, the disconnect tone echoing briefly in the room. I set the phone down and folded my hands together. For the first time since this began, I felt a flicker of sadness that had nothing to do with money. I had once believed Lauren respected me. I had mistaken politeness for alignment. By evening, Michael sent a message asking if we could work something out privately. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I opened the folder containing my estate documents and reviewed them carefully. My will had not been updated since my husband passed away. It listed Michael as primary beneficiary, with provisions for his children. I traced the lines of text slowly. Inheritance had always felt automatic. I realized now that nothing is automatic. Not respect, not loyalty, not entitlement. I closed the folder and placed it beside the financial statements. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second marking distance from the woman I had been just 1 week earlier. I was not angry in the way people expect anger to look. There were no raised voices in this quiet condominium. No dramatic gestures. Only decisions being made with increasing clarity. The 14 business days had begun, and for the first time in many years, I understood that protecting my future did not require permission from anyone. On the 10th business day, Daniel called again. His tone was measured, but there was a shift beneath it, something that suggested movement. Michael's attorney had responded. The letter acknowledged receipt of the demand and proposed a structured repayment plan over 5 years, with modest interest. I stood by the kitchen sink as Daniel explained the terms, watching a thin stream of water run over a single glass before turning off the faucet. 5 years. 60 months. I calculated quietly in my mind what that would mean at my age. I would be 73 before the final payment arrived. I thanked Daniel and told him I would review the proposal in person the following afternoon. When I hung up, I dried my hands carefully and walked into the living room. The sunlight slanted across the carpet in long pale lines. I sat down and allowed myself to think without rushing. A repayment plan implied obligation. Obligation implied acknowledgement. That mattered, but it also implied delay. I opened my file box and removed the updated transaction summary Daniel had prepared. The numbers were exact. $144,000 transferred. No partial return. No escrow. No written acknowledgement of debt until now. I thought about Michael's words from days earlier. We were going to pay it back. Going to. Future tense. Unstructured. Unrecorded. Now that the issue had weight, that future had been forced into documentation. That was not coincidence. It was pressure. Later that evening, Michael arrived again, this time calmer. He did not pace when he stepped inside. He sat across from me at the small dining table, his shoulders slightly lowered. I got the proposal, I said before he could speak. He nodded. It is reasonable, he replied. We cannot pull that kind of cash together overnight. I studied him carefully. There was less defiance now. More calculation. You were able to pull it together for the down payment, I said quietly. He inhaled and exhaled slowly, as if restraining frustration. That was different. I let the silence linger between us. Explain how, I said. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at his hands resting on the table. For a brief moment, he looked younger. Not like a boy, but like a man recognizing consequence. We already committed to the mortgage, he said finally. If we liquidate investments now, there will be penalties. I nodded once. You considered those penalties when you made the transfer? His jaw tightened. He did not respond. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any argument. I folded my hands together. 5 years is a long time, I said. Longer than you realize. He met my eyes then, perhaps understanding the implication for the first time. My years are not theoretical. They are finite. What do you want, he asked. The question sounded less defensive now, more uncertain. I considered it carefully before answering. I want acknowledgement, I said. In writing. I want a secured agreement. And I want the repayment timeline shortened. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That will strain us. I did not soften. Strain is not new to me, I replied. I have carried it before. He leaned back in his chair, absorbing that. For the first time since this began, there was no laughter. No accusation of drama. Only the realization that I would not retreat into silence for the sake of convenience. After he left, I called Daniel and requested that negotiations continue with revised terms. Not punitive, not cruel, simply firm. I walked to the bedroom and opened my dresser drawer again, glancing at the velvet box inside. I did not open it this time. I did not need to. The 14-day window was narrowing. The structure was forming. And somewhere between confrontation and documentation, the balance of power had begun to shift. The revised proposal arrived on the 13th business day. Daniel called just after lunch and read the updated terms slowly, line by line. A lump sum repayment of $60,000 within 30 days. The remaining balance to be paid over 18 months with formal interest and a secured agreement tied to their property. If the terms were not met, legal remedies would proceed without further negotiation. I listened without interrupting, seated at my kitchen table with both hands resting flat against the wood surface. 18 months. Not 5 years. Not indefinite. Structured. Enforceable. Real. When Daniel finished, he asked quietly, "Do you approve?" I closed my eyes for a brief moment and imagined the alternative. Letting it fade. Pretending it had not happened. Allowing comfort to replace accountability. I opened my eyes. "Yes," I said. "Proceed." That evening, Michael came alone again. There was no raised voice this time. No accusation. He stood in my doorway holding a folder in his hand, the edges slightly bent as if he had gripped it too tightly during the drive. "We will sign," he said before sitting down. His tone was not defeated. It was measured. I nodded once and gestured toward the chair across from me. "It is better this way," I said. He did not argue. For a moment, the room felt almost familiar again, like the quiet after a storm when the air settles and everything appears unchanged, even though nothing is exactly the same. "Lauren is not happy," he added. I studied his face carefully. "Is she unhappy about the repayment?" I asked. "Or about being told no?" He looked down at the folder and did not answer directly. Silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt less confrontational and more reflective. "I did not think you would push this far," he admitted finally. There was no resentment in his voice now, only realization. "You did not think I would protect myself," I replied softly. He inhaled slowly, then nodded once. "I misjudged that." The acknowledgement was small, but it mattered. He placed the folder on the table and slid it toward me. The formal agreement bore both his name and Lauren's, prepared for signature the following morning at Daniel's office. I scanned the pages briefly. The language was clear, direct, not cruel, not emotional, simply binding. You understand, I said, meeting his eyes. This is not punishment. He looked at me steadily. It feels like one, he said honestly. I considered that. Consequences often do, I answered. He did not argue. He did not laugh. He did not attempt to persuade me that I was overreacting. He simply sat there, absorbing the weight of his own decisions. After he left, I walked through my condominium slowly, turning off lights one by one as dusk settled outside. In the bedroom, I opened my file box and placed a copy of the draft agreement inside. Then I removed my will and set it on the dresser. The document felt lighter than it had days before. Clarity has a way of doing that. The next morning, as I dressed for the meeting at Daniel's office, I chose a simple navy blouse and pressed slacks. Nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic, just steady. The first payment would not restore what had been assumed. It would not erase the shift that had occurred between mother and son, but it would restore balance. And balance, I realized, was more important than comfort. The signing took place at 10 o'clock on a clear Thursday morning. Daniel's office felt the same as before, steady and orderly, but this time Michael and Lauren sat across the polished desk from me. Lauren's posture was rigid, her handbag resting upright beside her chair as if even it disapproved of the situation. Michael avoided my eyes at first, studying the stack of papers in front of him. Daniel reviewed each clause carefully, his voice even and deliberate. Lump sum payment within 30 days. Structured installments over 18 months. Interest defined. Security tied to their property. Clear consequences for default. No raised voices. No accusations. Just language precise enough to hold weight. When Daniel finished, he placed the pen on the desk between us. Michael reached for it first. His hand hesitated only briefly before signing his name. Lauren followed, her signature quick and firm, as if finishing the task would make it disappear faster. When the papers were turned toward me, I read the final page one more time, not because I doubted the terms, but because I understood that this moment marked a line that would not be erased. I signed calmly and placed the pen back on the desk. It was done. Outside, the late morning sun reflected off the windows of nearby buildings, bright and indifferent. In the parking lot, Michael paused beside his car. I never meant for it to go this far, he said quietly. I looked at him carefully, searching for resentment, for blame. I saw neither. I saw a man confronting the consequences of a decision he believed would remain hidden. It did not have to, I replied. He nodded once. There were no apologies exchanged. Not because they were unnecessary, but because sometimes acknowledgement is quieter than apology. He got into his car and drove away. I stood there for a moment longer before walking to my own vehicle. When I returned home, the condominium felt different. Not warmer, not colder, simply balanced. I removed my shoes at the door and carried my purse into the kitchen. The first payment would arrive within 30 days. Daniel would monitor compliance. The structure was in place. I opened my file box and placed the signed agreement inside, then removed my will once more. I scheduled an appointment to update it the following week. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Inheritance is not an automatic extension of biology. It is a reflection of trust. That afternoon, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the window. Children from a nearby building played in the small courtyard, their laughter carrying upward in brief bursts. Life continued, unbothered by legal documents and bank transfers. I realized then that the greatest shift had not been financial. It had been internal. I no longer assumed alignment simply because we shared blood. I no longer confused proximity with respect. When the first transfer arrived 3 weeks later, the notification appeared quietly on my banking application. $60,000 deposited. No fanfare. No message attached. I stared at the screen for a long moment before closing it. The amount restored liquidity, but more importantly, it restored boundaries. I stood and walked to the dresser in my bedroom, opening the small velvet box and lifting my husband's wedding band into my palm. I handled it. I whispered, not with triumph, but with steadiness. I returned the ring to its place and closed the drawer. The future was no longer assumed. It was secured. And for the first time since that afternoon when laughter replaced explanation, I felt not anger, not victory, but equilibrium.